So Professor Olene is an adjunct professor in the Department of Political Science, University of New Haven. And she's going to talk a little bit about what's next after this war that we're all in the midst of with Ukraine. Olene?
Yeah, well, thanks so much for including me. It's a real pleasure to speak to you, and I really enjoyed the conversation of the last half hour that I witnessed. So I was asked to talk about the war in Ukraine. I'm originally from Ukraine. I teach foreign policy and national security at University of New Haven in Connecticut, and I wanted to share some of my thoughts as far as where we're at right now. What's the status of the war, and why I think that Putin has miscalculated and is currently scaling back his objectives. But it doesn't mean that the war is ending or that fighting is lighting up. In fact, it's picking up because he's more frustrated. Let me share some slides. If you don't mind, not to inflict the pain of a PowerPoint presentation on you, but I wanted to just provide some visuals for the conversation that I thought could be helpful, if I may.
Yes.
If nobody minds it. All right, so what I wanted to talk about really mainly is focus on these three things here. Why did Russia invade? Why so brutally? Why the war has become so brutal? Why such maximalist aims? What's the current status of the war? And also, tell me how it ends, how this ends to echo, some of the sentiments shared previously as far as, now that we're so far into this war with the level of destruction and brutality, what are some of the potential off-ramps or de-escalation options that we have available to us? So first of all, just to give people just a little bit of an update as far as what the status of the war is. I'm sure many of you have been following. It has consumed everybody's attention for all the tragic reasons. But currently, the Russian advance has slowed, even though again it hasn't necessarily de-escalated, despite the fact that there have been promises made that we should see potential de-escalation. But you may know that 2 days ago, the Russian Defense Ministry announced a shift in their stated objectives to where they're no longer going to be pursuing encirclement of Kyiv in the north and Chernihiv outside Kyiv there, and concentrate their forces on the Eastern Front, particularly in the so-called liberation of Donbass, where they're currently holding some territory via proxy republics. But I think one thing to emphasize here is that looking in particular at yellow shaded zones here that have been recaptured by the Ukrainians. So the Ukrainian forces have not only successfully repelled the attacks that have been going on for the last 35 days, but they have also begun to go on counteroffensives and actually reclaim and recapture some of the occupied territories, kind of pointing to the effectiveness of the Ukrainian armed forces, but also to the fact that the war is still very kinetic, very dynamic, and people are still suffering every day despite attempts at negotiations. Just to put some numbers on the level of destruction so far, currently approximately half of Ukraine's population is experiencing some sort of displacement. About 4 million people have fled Ukraine. A lot of them are concentrated in neighboring countries in Poland, Romania, Lithuania, and other countries. The United States, as you may know, the Biden administration has recently announced that they would accept 100,000 refugees, which of course pales in comparison to the numbers that are currently resettling in Europe, that are measured in millions. And there are 12 million, there are 6 million people who have been displaced inside Ukraine, and 12 more million people who are currently stranded, unable to evacuate, or experiencing other war-related strife. So again, it hasn't affected a quarter of Ukraine's population, and we're just seeing the beginnings of the consequences, global consequences, really, that this level of destruction and humanitarian catastrophe is going to bring about. Of course, Mariupol, southeastern port on the Azov Sea coast there, has experienced has been a flashpoint for a long time. It has been under siege for several weeks now, with nearly 5,000 dead just in one city, and most buildings have been destroyed or damaged. So the city is completely dysfunctional, and currently there's still people trapped there with no access to food or electricity or medicine. This is where we're at right now. Again, I'll talk a little bit more about some of the scenarios for resolution, but let me just kind of highlight a few things to focus on why the level of brutality that we're seeing, and what are some of the objectives that Putin is pursuing here. And I wanted to borrow this framework from Paul Danieri, who wrote an excellent book in 2019 called Ukraine and Russia: From Civilized Divorce to Uncivil War, that I highly recommend everybody to read, where he basically outlines these three relationship dynamics that have created conflictual relationships that are currently informing the war in Ukraine. Now, notice too that I actually specifically sort of downsized the conflictual relationships among domestic forces within Ukraine that used to be much more significant and pronounced than they are now, which is to show that by invading Ukraine, Putin has actually unified Ukraine. So one of the political dynamics within Ukraine, given that Ukraine is the largest country in Europe by area, it is vast, and of course, as given its size, it is in a complex history. It's geographically, politically, and socially diverse, linguistically diverse as well. So given those differences, of course, that level of diversity was natural to Ukraine. And of course, there were political differences, including differences in geopolitical orientation. But those differences were natural, those are positive dynamics in a democracy, right? Where people have different views as far as what political or geopolitical orientation they think is best for Ukraine's national interest. But as the war has been, has intensified in the last month with a full-scale invasion, of course, it didn't start a month ago. It started in 2014. I would say that the relationship between Russia and the West is one that is most prominently featured here as being extremely binary and conflictual, as Russia has many grievances to the United States and NATO and sort of this proverbial West, where Putin believes that Ukraine has been exploited by the West, and the West is really trying to use Ukraine to get closer to Russia, to move its military infrastructure to Russia, to the Russian border, and potentially degrade Russia's military capabilities and overthrow Putin's regime. So Russia has this deep sense of historical insecurity, to where they perceive the West to be hostile and aggressive. Now, and of course, another dimension of Putin's grievances and sort of the maximalist aims in Ukraine has to do with a historical relationship between Ukraine and Russia, in which Putin doesn't perceive Ukraine to be a sovereign state. Putin thinks that Ukraine is a historical accident created by the Soviet Union, in particular Vladimir Lenin, who sort of carved out this part of what used to be Russian Empire and called it Soviet Ukraine, but the entity itself has sort of no historical foundations, which of course is flawed, and there's many historical accounts that disprove that, but that is a version of Ukraine that Putin believes in. And I think it's really important to kind of go back to that historical revisionism that Putin has been promoting, because it fundamentally informs not just his view of Ukraine and which direction Ukraine should be going, but the entire political elite of Russia. And I think it's important to keep that in mind, because there's a lot of focus right now on deposing Putin, getting overthrowing Putin, or somehow orchestrating expectation that the Russians will orchestrate some sort of regime change, which is, I think, would be probably a good start, but I'm not as optimistic as far as what some of the successive governments in Russia what their geopolitical orientation might look like, because it's not a given that their view of Ukraine will be different, because it is a prevailing view in among Russian political elites that Ukrainian sovereignty is a historical accident, and it should return to Russia's sphere of influence, so to speak. Now, with that in mind, and again, I don't want to be kind of putting words into Putin's mouth and engage in Putinology and quote from the man himself, which again, to emphasize the level of again, historical revisionism that is informing such maximalist and brutal tactics. So this is an essay that Putin wrote last year, in which was, I think, in many ways, a way of staging this attack that we're seeing right now. In which he said that he has long believed that Ukrainians and Russians were one people, a single whole, and that he has believed that a very long time. And then he also said that he believes that Ukraine has been instrumentalized by European states as a way of leveraging against Russia, and therefore, Ukrainian pro-Western orientation is a threat to is an existential threat to Russia's national security. Another grievance that informs this war, and the reason why it's so brutal, is because Putin fundamentally perceived US-Ukraine growing cooperation as increasingly more and more threatening. And I think the reason Putin chose to pull the trigger and actually initiate a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, because the trajectory in which Ukraine was moving was looking increasingly threatening and dangerous to Russia, as Ukraine has been up until prior to this war, Ukraine received substantial military assistance, security assistance from the United States, including defensive weapons, anti-tank missiles, and other equipment. Also, since Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014, NATO has increased its presence in the Black Sea, including conducting joint military exercises, reconnaissance flights, and so on and so forth. On top of that, in 2021, Zelensky took a very hard pro-Russian or anti-Russian turn and pro-NATO, pro-Western orientation by jailing one of main influencers in Ukraine, a Russia proxy, Viktor Medvedchuk, an opposition leader who was seen as one of the main allies of Putin in Ukraine. And also Zelensky banned pro-Russian media, denying Russia any sort of channels of influence in Ukraine. So all of these things combined added up to a point of no return for Putin, where Putin really perceived that if he waited any longer, that Ukraine would be getting only more pro-Western, it would be getting even more, only more Western support, more equipment. They would be, enhancing their military capabilities to where a future invasion for Russia would look increasingly more expensive. Hence, an escalation that we're seeing right now. The reason why I think Putin miscalculated Ukraine's ability to defend itself really is reflected in his perception of what kind of an operation this was going to be, as on the night before the invasion, he announced the beginning of the special operation to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine, that he, in his own mind, perceived to be a two-day operation, expecting Kyiv to capitulate and Zelensky to surrender Kyiv in to Russia's demands under the threat of Russian military. Now, this is why I think Putin miscalculated, and it hasn't, the war hasn't really gone as anticipated. One, his political aims did not match military capabilities and the ability of the Russian army to actually execute those maximalist aims. Putin also was uninformed about the state of his own military, as we just saw recently with intelligence disclosures from the Biden administration pointing that Putin has not been getting accurate information from his intelligence services, hence overconfidence in modernized Russian military. He underestimated Ukraine's military, underestimated not just Ukraine's military capabilities, but also the level of morale and civil resistance that the Russian forces would encounter. The Ukrainian armed forces have been very impressive in repelling Russian attacks, but I think what's even more impressive was the level of civilian resistance, where unarmed civilians literally jump in front of tanks and try to prevent the advancement of Russian troops into their villages and towns. He also underestimated the immense transformations that the Ukrainian society had undergone, to where a lot more people in Ukraine have begun to identify as Ukrainian first, and not meaning ethnic identity, meaning their loyalty to the Ukrainian state, which is ironic because the very thing that Putin has been denying is the very thing that has united Ukrainians, and that is the sense of statehood and nationhood. He also underestimated President Zelensky and his political will and resilience. He underestimated the West's solidarity and resolve. And I think most importantly, he really overestimated Russia's previous military successes that were limited campaigns and not full-scale invasion. So this is the first time really that Russia is executing a large-scale invasion of this kind. And I think they really overestimated their own ability to do so. So just briefly, where are we at in terms of potential scenarios for resolution? First of all, it seems obvious that Russia has scaled back their objectives based on their own failures. Of course, they're not admitting that. They're repackaging this into a new victory to where liberation of Donbass has been the intent all along. They are presenting this as the initial objective. Of course, there's evidence points to otherwise. That Putin has been forced to scale back his objectives, but the fighting has become more violent as a result because Russia is desperate to present victories to their population, to their leadership. The Russian forces are under immense strain due to tremendous losses, material losses, personnel losses. They're also undersupplied and under-equipped. And then there's a huge morale issues in the army as well. So all those things combined added up to this urge to increase the lethality of their attacks, make these strikes on civilian populations more brutal, more indiscriminate, to inflict as much damage as possible on Ukraine in pursuit of their objectives. And the reason they had to scale back was because obviously the pressure of sanctions is adding up, but they're also losing a lot of their military elites in the fight, which is unprecedented. And it's something that has shocked a lot of people around the world to see how many military, higher level commanders have actually been committed to the battlefield. And they're seeing increasing dissent, even though Putin has been coup-proofing, so to speak, his regime for as long as he's been in power, and sanction-proofing his regime. So he's been preparing. They're always ready for dissent, but of course not on the level that we have seen. Although, surprisingly, just the most recent poll just came out yesterday showed that the Russians are actually that the Russians approve of this so-called special operation. I personally believe that it could be because criminalizing or reporting on war or even calling this war a special operation is criminalized in Russia. So people are scared to admit that they disapprove of this operation, so to speak. But nonetheless, the numbers show that the Russian public is actually not as critical of the war in Ukraine as we would expect them to be. And then lastly, 2 days ago, Ukraine and Russia had a fourth round of negotiations where Ukraine signaled their willingness to forego ambitions to join NATO, perhaps declare a neutral status, but they also want security guarantees from 11 other countries, not NATO per se, but they want security guarantees from 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, plus Canada, Germany, Israel, Italy, Poland, and Turkey. Status of Donbass is to be negotiated separately, and then Zelensky wants to hold a referendum. Now, on Russia's side, they signaled readiness to reduce military activity around Kiev, although they have not acted on their promises as shelling continues and missile strikes continue around Kiev. And they had also expressed willingness to allow Ukraine, so to speak, to join the EU. Now, these negotiations, of course, are very controversial as, there's absolutely zero trust. So I think that, as much as we want to read these attempts as positive signs, I think there's still a little hope for, or a little reason to be optimistic, because fighting, Russia has not de-escalated, and Ukraine is is now paying a very high price for being in a position to make any concessions, because the people, even if Ukraine is a horizontal society, even if Zelensky caves in, it's not a top-down society, it's bottom-up. Even if Zelensky decided to make concessions, the people and the Ukrainian army would not agree to those concessions. So I think that we're going to see a protracted war in the immediate future. And I'll end there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Olene. This was an amazing history lesson and a lesson in the realities that underscore all these military shenanigans in Ukraine, which has brought so much trauma and so much suffering to millions of people.
Yeah.
Any questions?
Yeah. Is there any family of yours in Ukraine? Yes.
Yeah, I have, my family is in Eastern Ukraine. They're okay. Being okay is a relative term these days, because nobody is okay. We've sort of, they've been in similar conditions for the last 8 years. So my family is in the Donbass, so we saw a lot of fighting there in 2014 and 2015, and then after that line of contact was frozen, so to speak, violence seemed to have de-escalated, but nonetheless, it was still a war zone. But now, of course, the entire country is in disarray. It's hard to know where people could actually find safety, because even in Western Ukraine, there have been strikes on military facilities there, in all the way, out in Western Ukraine by the Polish borders, where a lot of people had relocated, but it doesn't mean that it's safer there. So it's it's really these are just really turbulent times, because I think we're just beginning to see this intergenerational trauma that will engulf Ukrainians in societies for generations to come.
Yes.
I think people are still in survival mode, and there's still enough adrenaline to get them through the day. But I think once things are going to start coming down, that's when we're going to see a lot of trauma manifesting itself in most tragic ways.
Well, let's pray that they come to some mutual understanding, and somebody can reason with Putin and end it quickly. Yeah. So we are living in an information age. So hopefully, but our hearts go out, and you guys are so brave. And I think you've taught the whole world about bravery. So we're so proud of Ukraine, and I'm so grateful for you to be here with us today. So I will do another interview with you later, but this is really awesome. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
I think that it seems to me that what is the common thread that weaves through all these presentations is that despite the drastic effects of power and control and ego, we have resilience and loyalty and love and grit and courage and wisdom, the collective forces that are the only forces that can withstand the onslaught of so much ego that results in devastation across generations.
Any questions?
Let me say this. I'm just privileged to have such a wonderful collection of people to participate in these discussions. I thank you all for your valid and candid interactions, and also your very frank and honest responses. You're great people. I see your magnitude, your magnetism, and I'm excited about this and where we're going that way. And so I just want to encourage you in your own day-to-day activities, and just know that Brightside is here, and we're ready to help you participate and forge forward for the victories collectively in whatever regard. And there's lots that we can do. And as we discussed in this and talk, I think there's even more that we haven't even talked about. So be encouraged. Be
And
encouraged.
I want to just acknowledge Linda Thompson. Are you there? Priscilla and Donna. So this group began with a very small group of women. We were hosting our Women Business Empowerment back in 2019, I think it was, just before, the day before they announced the pandemic. And you know, all the things that go on when you're organizing an event, but this group has stuck together for 3 years. And we have grown now to 1,000 women in this network. So I think that, you know, what we're doing is great. And I think that I'm so honored and privileged that, you know, I have a loyal group that has stayed with me throughout. And not one of my sponsors pulled out. They all hung tight with me and didn't ask for refunds and gave me their time and everything that I needed to keep going. And so I really want to acknowledge Linda and Priscilla. I don't know if they're there, and Donna. 3 of the 9 are here. So that says a lot. So happy anniversary. And to all the newcomers, I hope you will stick it out with us and maybe we'll see 10 years.
Let's make some money here.
So let's see.
Make some money.
So with that ado, we'll end this today, and this will all be available on demand. You will get a lot of emails from me coming through, and we'll have these videos shared through email, and we will have this page the whole year. So, you know, all these videos will be preserved and archived, and we will be using them all through the year. So because women topics are used all the time. So thank you for contributing. I'll let Ramona wrap us up, and Prophetess Ebony, she's our prayer warrior, and she prays for us every single day. And if you're of a different faith, we'll give you a moment of silence to acknowledge your faith and pray with you as well. So Ramona.
Claire?
Yes.
Hey, it's Donna. Before Ramona does her wrap up and we have prayer, can I just ask the professor one quick question?
Yes,
Do
go
you
ahead.
mind? Okay. Professor, you know, I spent time in the Balkans. I was in Europe for quite a long time with the Balkan war situation, which, you know, I'm not sure it's ever going to be fully resolved. So that leads to my question. With this, first of all, with the sanctions that have been imposed on the Russians, do you think those are working? And then as a follow-up to that, if the Russian people continue to pressure Putin and he does decide that he's going to do some negotiated peace with the Ukrainians, okay, what reassurances do we have that he's not going to have designs to come back? Because it's obvious he really wants Ukraine for multiple reasons. You know, he also likes having that warm water port. He likes having, you know, control over another piece of territory that he thinks legitimately belongs to the Russians, even though it doesn't. So first of all, are the sanctions working? And secondly, if there's a negotiated peace, how can we trust Putin?
Thank you for those questions, and thank you for sharing your experience earlier. Thank you for your service. So on the sanctions, I think sanctions will work long term. You know, obviously they're not working in the immediate. I actually think that they're, you know, even in the short term, you know, the reason we're seeing Putin recalibrating in real time, I think, is partially because of sanctions, because especially import controls. Because, you know, even now we're seeing reports from one of the largest tank manufacturers in Russia not being able to replenish lost equipment in Ukraine because they can't produce any more tanks or fighter jets because of sanctions. You know, they can't import parts from overseas, and they rely on technology and parts. You know, they're deeply connected to the global economy. So I think over time, absolutely, sanctions will you know, exert enough pressure to translate into, you know, recalibrated political objectives. Now, in the immediate future, right? So, you know, we're not seeing even though Putin has been saying, he had expected this, like it's not a surprise, right? Perhaps he didn't expect the scale of sanctions and the level of coordination, but to say that this was completely unexpected, when you were going to invade another country, that at the very least, you would be expecting sanctions, right? So he has been sanction proofing his regime for 20 years. And I think there is that expectation that they will get by and they will look to get China and India on board. And that's what they're negotiating right now. And the other thing why I think sanctions will, have more effect than we're willing to give them credit is because currently in ongoing negotiations with Ukrainians themselves say that the number one thing that keeps coming up in terms of leverage is Russians want sanctions relief. Whatever demands they put forward, they want Ukrainians to convince the West, the collective West, that to start that Russia is to be trusted, that we can start lifting sanctions so that Russian economy can get a lifeline. And that's why I think that sanctions will be important leverage for us, because that's what they actually bring up as a trade-off for whatever concessions they're willing to make, if they make. Now we've been at it for 8 years. We're not going to take their word for anything, until we see real action. And our intelligence, the U.S. intelligence, has also proven very effective. These intelligence disclosures have been amazing in the way they had been accurate in predicting, in disclosing Putin's plans, but also they've been pretty accurate in not just in the sort of battlefield information, but also in intercepting communication between Russian leadership representatives. But I think, having said that, I would say that until we're not going to take promises or declaratory statements. Obviously, when we see real withdrawal and de-escalation, then we can start negotiating real sanctions relief. And then your other question was about a coup in Russia. I'm not very optimistic because, the Russian people, first of all, you can't really change that society, the fabric of the Russian society overnight. It's egregious what's going on in Ukraine. But Russia has such a tragic history, right? So the Russian people are so conditioned in this environment of, Russia having this tragic history and having to constantly deal with foreign aggressors. So the Russian people are not as active in general in the political life of the country. So they're not as quick to react or protest as we would expect people to. So that's one thing. And the other thing too is, they're afraid. But also, as I said in my presentation, I'm not so sure that Putin's view of Ukraine is Putin's only. There's been many studies that point to the fact that it is a pretty popular point of view, not just among political elites, but among the general public, that Ukraine, as some people have put it, Ukraine needs to be disciplined by the Russians because they have gone, off track in their sort of historical orientation. And that's really upsetting to see that level of that condescending view of Ukraine as not being able to make their independent decisions. I'm not optimistic about regime change in Russia because I don't think that as much as is a top-down regime, but in many ways Putin actually represents the Russian point of view. And that's the point of view that had been cultivated in Russia for a very long time. So, we're operating in very different informational spaces and echo chambers. So what we know and the assumptions that we make are not the assumptions that they make about the world. So there's a real disconnect there.
How sad.
Thank you, Professor. Great presentation. I really enjoyed it. Thank you
Thank
again
you.
for being here.
Yeah, really.
Thank you so much.
All right. We never heard from Reginald. He fought in the Afghanistan war. Reginald, thank you for your service. Do you have any comments?
Only a couple. It's just I listen to everything, and Professor, thank you, because I've been watching the news every day, keeping up with all of this. And then of course there's what the media shows us all, and then there's how things actually are. And then there's worldview, which you very well described, between the Ukrainians, the Russians, and how the rest of the world views all of this. I just hope a solution happens soon. But of course, that's going to be it won't be done sight unseen. It'll, it definitely would have to be done in good faith for, of course, for the government and the people of Ukraine, and as well as the world, to see what's going on before any real change. But my heart and prayers are with the people of Ukraine, because they're the ones who are paying the price for all of this, and the heaviest ones. So that's really all I wanted to share on that.
Yeah.
But I listened intently to your presentation, Professor Lennon, and I loved it because I got a lot of information from it. That's my thing. I love keeping up with current events. As a former service member, retired service member, it was important to know what was going on into the world, and to me, it still is today. And it's just I look forward to a day where no one has to worry about things like war, have to worry about families being displaced, have to worry about people being drafted, conscripted, and sent over to a neighboring country where there are where the cultures may be different, but there are such ethnic similarities.
Yeah.
And it's just it's interesting to watch. A lot of the things that we've seen are very appalling to watch, and most horrific at best. But we all hope for peace, and we all hope for something. And the thing that I think about is, what if there is a solution? And what if the governments of Ukraine and the Russian Federation do reach a consensus? What I think about is all of the millions of Ukrainian people who were forced to fled, and what they're coming back to, and what they'll be coming back to. That's what I think about.
Yeah.
Because,
it's yours.
because that rebuilding is gonna be something else. And when you can rebuild something, but it will never be like it was. And it's just that's the thing that I think about. As an Iraqi freedom veteran, I know about that in detail, where the Republic of Iraq was a lot of things were done, were destroyed. A lot of things were destroyed with the intent to topple the dictator Saddam Hussein. But the thing is, when you tear apart, you got to rebuild. And regardless of what the reasons are, it's a really a interesting situation. But I'm glad that you took the time today, Professor Lennon, to educate us on why things are the way they are, and why, and what is the Ukrainian viewpoint with regards to this, what is the Russo viewpoint with regards to this, and what is the world viewpoint with regards to this. And that it helps provide a lot of clarity, and to keep us better educated on on what's going on. And the thing about it is, we don't want history to repeat itself, but sadly it has done so. But this in itself is a major development, but a lot of people are not realizing the country of Ukraine has seen war for many, many years before now. It's just been happening. It's just been happening little by little. But like so many millions of people across the world, I pray for the Ukrainian people, and of course, we pray for peace and some type of solution.
Thank
I'm
you so
gonna-
much. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. It's heartfelt remarks. And I think your the parallels between Iraq are interesting and instructive, not just from the point of view of Iraq's level of destruction and rebuilding, but also from the point of view of the United States' actions as a great power. I think it really brings back the tragedy of great power politics, because great powers assume that military power alone can translate into political victories. And what Ukraine has shown is that, even though Russia may be the second greatest military power in the world, but the morale and the willingness to fight by local populations is also decisive. People are, and this is what we have seen in Ukraine so far, is that that patriotism and that that resilience, that level of resilience is, despite obviously correlation of forces is obviously in Russia's advantage, but it didn't prove to be decisive. Of course, the US's support, the anti-tank, anti-aircraft systems were also decisive in this fight. But I think it's really teaching the world that this idea of great powers deciding for or having buffer zones really is a thing of the past. So Ukraine now is reclaiming the rights of small and medium-sized countries.
Yes.
By showing that they too have agency, they too have legitimacy, they too have dreams for independence, and they too have an opinion, and they can fight. And it's not a given that a great military power can achieve political and military victories in a battlefield if they face a militarily inferior opponent. But the will of the people to fight is absolutely an overlooked variable that we sometimes underestimate, and I think the United States has underestimated it. And Russia is now, due to its own hubris and its own delusions of great power, is getting this lesson in reality, right? Is that the reality on the ground is very different from what we assume it to be, because we all operate in our silos, and social media reinforces these silos. And look, I'm a naturalized U.S. citizen, right? So I am, my loyalty is undivided. I accepted. I'm loyal to the United States as far as my citizenship is concerned. I care about the people of Ukraine, and my heart goes out to and I care about the future of the country and the intergenerational trauma that will be reflected in all the art, music, literature. We're looking into the future where everything the Ukrainian people will be producing will be in one, somehow channeling that pain, that trauma. And that will shape, I already know it will shape the rest of my life. I told my kids that this war will define the rest of their lives. As we're, even just by, we're not there, but we're all affected by this idea that this level of violence can be possible and cannot be stopped. And also, the conversation that I have with my students is, it's interesting if you sort of remove all the nuance from this conversation, political nuance, then what it comes down to is that human life outside NATO border matters less than human life within the NATO border, because the political messages so far have been, if the war spills over to a NATO country, we will for sure defend life there. If the war spills over outside Ukraine, that the United States is absolutely committed to defending a NATO country. So what it really comes down to is that human life outside that manufactured, that artificially drawn NATO border matters less than within an artificial border. So we've created these artificial borders, and I think sometimes are misled by these artificial alliances and borders that give us an excuse to be complicit and indifferent. And that is sort of philosophically something that we'll have to grapple with, as far as you
I
know, how
agree
we,
with you.
what value do we put on human life, and how it's
Human
it's
life
really
is
needed.
human life, whether inside NATO's borders or outside NATO's borders. And collectively, if we come to a probability or a point of reference that perhaps we delve into the caring for human life no matter where, and trying to make a difference that way. And it appears that, you know, that societal governments have attempted to have us understand it that way, but human life is human life. And hopefully we're moving into an era or a generation or a cultural persona that, you know, right is right no matter what. And so these are the discussions that we're cultivating, and people like you and the minds like you can make a difference in that way, and supporting them, the people who are fighting, the people who are fighting for their lives.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting. Somebody said that Ukrainians are voting with their lives. How very real that is.
Yeah.
They're voting with their lives. They're casting their votes for the life, for democracy. So I mean, and so these are things that we have to really contemplate, cultivate, and stand for. And so I hate to beleaguer, but we have to close out. But you guys are amazing. You really are amazing. And we're going to take a few minutes to go through all the books that we supported and are reading today. And so the first book, Nermina's Chance.
We want you to get it.
Yeah, read the book. It's a great
And
book.
Olene, I'd like you to get her to speak at the
Okay,
university at
okay,
some
okay.
point.
We'll
So
do it.
I just want to promote her book.
Oh, thank you. I'll definitely check it out. Thank you.
I'll connect you.
Okay, next
Um,
book.
The next book was about Ayurveda and Dr. Sunitha, The Doctor Won't See You Now, and that was really fabulous.
Mhm.
About the Civil War, the surviving Yellowstone, and then the two faith-based books. One is a journal with a book, Faith to Rise, and Linda Thompson is here, and her two books are amazing, Jealousy and Speak Positively. And Linda's also, congratulations, happy anniversary. We're celebrating 3 years on, Linda. And this is a momentous day that we've done this
So-
3 times, 3 years in a row, women business empowerment.
So God, I pray that God grant me the
Serenity.
serenity to accept the things that I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So with
Elizabeth,
that, I
Tisha had a
That is
question.
Linda.
So what?
Tisha had a question,
Tisha,
right? You had
okay.
your hand up. I saw a hand.
Okay.
No, okay.
Okay.
So y'all so
Linda,
powerful.
Maybe that was a
in
clap.
your way.
we need Linda to speak because she's one of the founding members of this group.
She's trying to speak.
Yeah, Linda, can
She's
we turn
muted.
your sound
Okay,
on?
we got
Congratulations,
her.
happy anniversary.
Yes. I tell you, it is a pleasure to be a part of the group. A lot of changes have come about since we started 3 years ago. I think our first, Elizabeth, you probably told about the first time we started. I think that was when the pandemic started.
Well, we
And
were on for much longer, but this group, Women Business Empowerment, started during the pandemic because it was the day before the pandemic. And Linda was the keynote speaker. So, yeah.
So
Yes. So it's a pleasure to be a part of the group. And I just enjoyed today. There's been amazing speakers today. And it's just wonderful being a part of the group.
yeah, very good.
And
Thank
you
you.
will
Linda.
see more of me a little bit later on. I'm kind of regrouping.
Okay.
Yes,
very
we
good.
want to. We want
Okay.
to.
So very well. Let us take off. We're on the runway, about to take this transcontinental flight that we are changing people's lives, our own lives, our communities, and the things that we can do for long term.
And
I want you to be encouraged. I want you to be,
Esther Perara, we have to say something. about Esther Perara. Okay,
okay.
and we have to say something about Esther Perara, who passed away. She really was a big part of this group and kept us straight in line. So Esther, to you in heaven, we love you dearly.
So be encouraged, and also don't never forget. And I can't leave without these last few words. Take the moment, rub your hands together. Rub your hands together, because your magnetism helps heal Your magnetism gives us power. Your magnetism gets things done. They say that hurt hands heal, and yours can. Be encouraged. Be encouraged. Share the love. Show the love. You're also very powerful, you know, and I'm encouraging you. Green lights all the way. Green lights all the way. Green
Okay,
lights all the way.
so Ebony, close us in prayer and Elton will do the final prayer.
Okay.
Go ahead, Ebony.
Yes, you do.
Yes, ma'am. Heavenly Father, we just thank you for today. We thank you for everybody that is on the line, but most of all, we thank you for letting us be able to stand in the gap for our brothers and sisters that are in Ukraine, God. Your word says when 2 or 3 are gathered in your name, there you are in the midst, God. And we ask that no more harm comes near their dwelling. And just like you told David to pursue and get back what was his, God, they are going to pursue and get back what is theirs, God. They are going to have that they're going to have that Joshua and Caleb spirit, God, where they're not going to have no fear, despite of how big Russia might be in the eyesight of them, God. To you, they are bigger and they can conquer any and everything that you have for them to do, God. That spirit of fear, God, we bind it up right now and send it back to the pits of hell, because we know your word says that you have not given your people a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind, God. So we ask that they take back every single thing that the enemy has taken from them, God. And then we stand on the wall and we sound the alarm when we see something going on like we did today, God. It wasn't a coincidence that the professor, she could have been anywhere else, but she chose to be on here today, God, to give us knowledge. And your word says that your people die because of the lack of knowledge, God. So we thank you for her being able to give us the knowledge that we need, God. And then let us be able to discern what it is that you have in the end times, God, because we know that we are in the last hour, God, but we will be as wise as a serpent and as harmless as a dove, God, when it comes to the things that you have for us, God. We know spiritually, God, that you will be with them, but physically, God, we need your hand to move like it's never moved before, God, on that land, God. Let them be able to destroy whatever it is that the enemy has tried to come and take from them, God, and let them be rooted and grounded in who it is that you have called them to be. And we know that we do not have to be there to intercede for them, God. We can be in our living rooms. The mothers can be in their rocking chairs. There could be somebody washing dishes in their house, or they could be playing with their children, or even in the supermarket. But when you place it on their heart, God, let them know why you're placing it on their heart, God, and let them have a ready spirit, God, to be able to do what it is that you have called them to do. We thank you of these things. We thank you for every man and woman that is on the line today, God, whether they said something or whether they didn't say nothing, God. We ask that no harm comes near their dwelling, God, that you put a hinge of protection around them and everything that is close to them, God. We ask you of these things in your holy and righteous name, in the mighty name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
I only want to encourage you, be encouraged. It's in your hands. You have the power. We're praying for you. And Brightside is always going to be there for you. Let us know what you need, how we can help. God bless you all. And to him, he has the glory, and we profess his power in what we do. God bless you all. Have a great day, rest of the week. Finish the month. Start a great new month.
Thank
All
you.
the best.
Thank you so much. And if you're
Thanks,
watching,
everybody.
write us a comment.
Right.
Bye.
All the best.
Fabulous day.
Bye. So long.
Good job, Elton and Claire.
Wow.